politicians who will be prophetic and moral leaders and not exploit the fears of their people.
Raise your fists together.
We can accept no reason. We have fought racism because we never allowed cynicism to overtake us. I think when one looks at the struggles you've had with this show, I mean, racism has tried to jam you, but if you had moved and become cynical, then even if racism had moved, you still couldn't have conducted your show.
I had a little slogan once. I asked some of my students, if racism quit, could you take advantage of it?
Oh, that's the fundamental proposition. I mean, that's the case of Muhammad Ali. Racism took his title, but they didn't take his manhood.
Right.
And so when racism stepped out the way, he didn't step back in the ring 300 pounds and slow, you know, because he kept his head together, you know. When people tend to get their education and strive hard, they can change their class even though they can't change their caste. For example, when I was born on the poor side of town, you know, with the slop jar in the house like other neighbors, and the bathroom or the outhouse in the backyard, and the tin-top roof, and the coal bin under the house, and you cut kindling with the wood stove, and you washed on the wash pot, and you had the clotheslines hanging out in the backyard, and you had the garden. Everybody in the house and everybody in the neighborhood had a skeleton key to everybody else's house. And I had to walk past the white schools to get to the black schools and use the books 4 years after white children had used them and not have backs on those books and couldn't bring those books home because 6 of us had to use that book.
Peace and love, and welcome to Black Press USA's morning show, where we bring you the headlines and the culture. We are still celebrating and remembering the life well lived of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Yesterday was the first day of his body lying in repose at Rainbow Push Coalition, and of course, BLACKPRESS NNPA member, Chicago Defender, was on the scene bringing us visuals. So make sure you follow Chicago Defender on social media and all their handles as they continue to cover and bring you first insight and views of the celebration of Reverend Jesse Jackson's life in Chicago. He'll be lying in repost in today as well. So make sure you follow the Chicago Defender. And then, of course, formal services will be held in South Carolina and Washington on Sunday, March 1st through Wednesday, March 4th. Then he'll head back to Chicago at the People's Celebration at House of Hope on Friday, March 6th. And then there will be a private homegoing service at Rainbow Push on Saturday, March 7th in Chicago. And we'll continue to bring you more of the life of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Today we're going to do something special and bring you a conversation with Reverend Jesse Jackson from 1989 from the show Evening Exchange with Kojo Nandi from Howard University. But before we do that, we want to let you know on Monday, we have a very special show for you. Fulton County Commissioner Mo Ivory will be joining us to talk about what happened the day the Trump administration came in and pulled those files. We'll talk about how they're trying to get Fulton County commissioners are trying to get those files back. So Fulton Commissioner Mo Ivy will be with us Monday for a special edition of the Black Press USA Morning Show. Before we get going, Orangey wants to remind you that today, there she is. That's Mo Ivory. She'll be joining us on Monday, right there. And so Warren G wants to remind you that today is Happy Swag Hoodie Day. He says he's rocking Bethune-Cookman, but also he brings up a good point. Early voting ends today in Texas. So if you live and vote in Texas, make sure that you get out the vote. And he brought up a really good point. Last primary election in Texas, only 1 out of 5 voted. And so we know Jasmine Crockett is boots on the ground out there. We'll be paying attention to what happens over the weekend in Texas as they prepare to head into their voting on Tuesday. And so with that being said, take a look at this conversation with Reverend Jesse Jackson from night.
The voice of duty has whispered, thou must. I rise to declare that I can and announce to you this day my decision to seek the nomination of the Democratic Party for the presidency of the United States of America.
Carry your freedom upon high.
Just commenting to our guest that there was a gentleman behind him who had a mustache then who does not have a mustache now, but our guest certainly has a mustache. We're talking, of course, with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Welcome to Washington.
Well, good to be back on Evening Exchange.
How do you like living in Washington so far?
I like it very much. In many ways, there has not been a lot of adjustment. For the last 10 or 12 years, I have spent 2 or 3 days a week in Washington, commuting between Washington and Chicago, because much of my work is out of Washington. And my wife is from Newport News, Virginia. It's kind of home for us. And now that Youssef is at the University of Virginia playing football, get that little plug in, it's much more convenient for us. Lots of friends here, but beyond that, I am convinced that just as Montgomery at one point was the point of challenge on the whole issue of ending apartheid in the South, and Selma was that for the voting rights challenge, and Chicago was that for urban empowerment and the open housing drive, that Washington is now the point of urban challenge for this country. If in fact there's not a commitment to empower and to emancipate Washington and come to grips with its urban challenges, then no city will in fact be bailed out of the urban crisis. And so in many ways, it's not only a place I like to function, it's the point of urban challenge for America today.
It is also the headquarters of many national organizations, and indeed both the Rainbow Coalition and Operation Push are national organizations, so some people would say they should logically be headquartered in Washington. But let's look at the negative speculation for 1 minute. There are those who said your political influence in Chicago was waning. Did you, for instance, ever consider running for mayor of Chicago or any other elected office
Never
in that
did.
city?
Way back around 1970, when the Democratic Party had such a lock on politics there, if one were to run for Democratic nomination in Chicago, say 1970, you would have to get, say, 4,000 signatures. Daley had a lock on that. If one were Republican, you would have to get, say, 12,000. An independent, 96,000. So we chose to challenge the inequity in that arrangement. Harold Washington eventually ran not as a Democrat, but as an independent Democrat, because Jane Byrne was the nominee, Daley was number 2, Harold was number 3. So we kept fighting to break those structures up. I never sought to run for office in Chicago. Unfortunately, when Harold Washington died so suddenly, his coalition split, and the Sawyer won the immediate struggle, the internal struggle, and then the other Harold Washington forces filed a suit to drive him out of office. In other words, the Daley forces conceded that this was Harold's seat until 1991, but our own forces filed a suit against the rest of the family. And when the Evans forces beat Sawyer, and the Sawyer forces beat Evans, and Daley
Did it ever occur to you at that time to step in and run yourself?
No, it was not the thing for me to do. One, I thought that, first of all, legally, the council would have to make a choice. It chose one of its own, which was Sawyer. It was not an open election.
That's true.
And then following that, there was an open election, and Tim Evans chose to run. So I struggled to try to keep our family together. But I did not see that as my base of operations. After all, in 1988, I got 7 million votes based upon the support of the people. Ted Kennedy got 6.9 million votes in 1980. Mundell got 6.7 in 1984. So I earned 7 million votes.
Across the nation.
And clearly within reach of getting 10 million. In a real sense, I stand a real chance of winning our party's nomination. And we must not allow people to forget that we won Michigan and Mississippi. We won Alaska. We won Puerto Rico. We won Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina and Virginia. And that's why today, when we speak of DC statehood, for example, we don't do so from the position of being occupied in DC. We speak from the base that we won states where senators and congress people must now vote or face the consequences of our ability to have an impact upon their upon their careers.
That allows me to raise the same speculative issue that the rest of the media have been raising with you since you decided to move to Washington. We'll try to come at it in a slightly different way. Many of your supporters whom I have spoken to do not like the possible perception which they feel may be coming in the media that you will be increasingly portrayed as a perennial presidential candidate who never wins. They seem to feel that it is important for your resume in between to hold some elected office. I have heard you say in the past that you do not necessarily agree with that formulation, but how do you respond to their desire to see you hold some elected office before running for president?
For example, there are very few people in America tonight who would think that I am less a leader than Dan Quayle, and he's vice president.
Yes.
If Dan Quayle can be the vice president in line to be president, I can stand in front of the line. He couldn't run across this country and get 7 million votes, for example, from farmers in Iowa to coal miners in Virginia to hospital workers in New York to urban America. Some leaders are elected, and some elected officials are not leaders. The Constitution says be old enough, be American enough, and gain the confidence of the people. And so it is not inherently or legally necessary to do that. It is a credential to have. But you know, I've made a payroll for a staff every 2 weeks for 25 years. I've built organizations. Push still stands. I've negotiated with corporations. Most senators and Congress people have not. I've negotiated with foreign countries to get prisoners freed from foreign jails. Most Congress people and senators and governors have not. I got 7 million votes. No governor has ever gotten 7 million votes. No U.S. senator on the Hill, no U.S. congressperson has gotten 7 million votes. And so I've taken my case to the people. I faced 50-odd debates, and by the standards of my adversaries, won almost all of those debates. And so I have a command of leadership obligations domestically and foreign policy as well. And let the record show that the issue, as I see it in Washington, while all there's the preoccupation about who's going to be mayor, number one, that there is no election this year. There's an election in New York, in Detroit, Atlanta. There is no election in Washington. If one were to declare today, you couldn't even get the papers for filing until May because there is no election. It's a kind of hype that's diversionary. And what it's diverting attention from is that the real issue, as I see it here, is D.C. is under occupation, under congressional occupation. The Congress that's unaccountable to the district has the power to appropriate land, to expand or to restrict the budget. This Congress can impose its whim upon the district, gives it limited home rule, and yet the district has more people than 5 other states. It pays more taxes than 10 states. That's taxation without representation. And that must insult us to action, thus to seek empowerment.
You are perceived as a spokesperson on national, international issues, and obviously statehood for the District of Columbia is at the very least a national issue. But since you have been here, you have been clearly focusing on local and area issues. Why is that? Are you seeking to establish yourself as a citizen of this community?
But you know, in some real sense, when one forces the issue of education over entertainment on the front of our agenda, it is at once local and national and international. I'm convinced, for example, that when our parents, as they're now doing, as they began today in Prince George's County, as they will do in Washington come this Thursday, begin to take their children back to school by the thousands and reduce truancy and absenteeism and dropouts and challenge these drug dealers. That message emanating from Washington, the nerve center of the nation, will be sent forth across the whole country.
Tell our viewing audience briefly what happened in Prince George's County this morning.
In effect, what happened was we made an appeal in Prince George's County as well as D.C. to get a minimum of 25,000 parents to take their children to school and meet their child's teacher and commit themselves to turning off that television at least 2 hours a night. Today in Prince George's County, there were traffic jams. Paris Clendenin, the executive of the county, agreed to release parents for 2 hours for administrative leave. Mayor Barra made the same judgment to release 51,000 parents, to meet their child's teacher and B, to pick up report cards every 9 weeks. Now, mayors and governors across this country, indeed Sununu of the federal government, must follow the lead and pattern set by Marion Barry and set by Clendenin. When parents and teachers are apart, it's like jumper cable and battery. There's no firepower. There's nothing happening. When they connect, something goes off. So many of our youth have been victims of these dead cells. Their disconnection meant the children fell in the gap. But when they come together, there is this bridge. We want to take it a step further. Since we have a generation of 19-year-old mothers with 6- and 7-year-old children and 28 to 30-year-old grandmothers who for the most part themselves were abandoned by young men who impregnated them, and they dropped out of school and had the children, and for the most part are now on public assistance and sometimes hopeless. Why can't these parents begin to take the children to school? Child goes down the hall to the first grade, mother goes down the hall to adult education or vocational education. Mother has second chance, begins to work her way off of welfare back in the sense of independence. Child less likely to not attend school because mother and parent are in contact. Education then becomes the center of the enterprise of that home. This is essentially a non-budget item. It's a shift in our attitudes about education and our appetites for it.
You mentioned Mayor Barry. How's your relationship with him now?
Good relationship, a long and an abiding relationship. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we had this massive rally at Tacoma Park, was hosted by Congressman Walter Fauntroy, and a cross-section of officials were there. Charlene Drew Jarvis and Dave Clark and Hilda Mason, and the cross-section of leaders were there, and Bill Cosby was our very special guest to inspire parents to take their children to school this week. And Marion was there declaring again to those parents who live in D.C. and surrounding counties of his contribution to making this educational enterprise work. And so we work together.
Okay, let's take a telephone call. I have a lot more questions, but I'm sure you do too. But it's your turn now. Thank you for waiting. You are on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Caller. I guess that caller can't hear me. You have been described as having told your staffers from time to time that you are involved in an endless campaign. Assuming that that does not specifically mean for president, could you tell our viewing audience what do you see as the ultimate objective as of your campaign? In other words, your long-range goals.
You know, my commitment to service is not limited in that way. This idea about being a perennial candidate, Reagan ran 3 times. Since my vote doubled from 84 to 88, and we're on a growth curve, I spoke in St. Paul, Virginia, Sunday to about 5,000 white coal miners who didn't support us in 1984 or 88, to about 30,000 hospital workers in New York, Eastern Airline pilots, machinists, and flight attendants, now are communication workers. Since our support base is growing, since we are on a growth curve, as it were, our seeking the nomination of our party at some appropriate time is a winnable goal. It is achievable. But what is significant each time I ran was not just my running, but we increased registration. We increased consciousness. Many other people ran and won for other offices. And so if my running simply clears the way to open the doors for others to come through, then that's a contribution.
Okay, let's take another telephone call, or the telephone call. Thank you for waiting. Hopefully you're still there. Go ahead, please.
Hello? Yes, I'd like the Reverend Jackson to respond to this question. I have my doubts as to whether he can separate friendship from leadership, specifically if he examines a record in the District of Columbia under his friend Marion Barry's leadership, infant mortality and the homicide rate. I don't see how he can say that he is a supporter of the mayor and also the people at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you know, that's a strange question. One would not accuse the mayor of being the cause of the rise in infant mortality. I think, for example, if we commit ourselves as a nation to providing prenatal care for mothers, that would be a great factor. If a woman is pregnant for 9 months, it will cost less than $1,000 with the prenatal care. Without prenatal care, a low birth weight baby will cost up to $2,000 a day, 20 weeks in the hospital. Mayor Barry and I went to D.C. General Hospital several weeks ago now. we saw about 60 little babies. Half of them were born between 1.7 and 2.4 pounds because little boys impregnated little girls and then left those young girls. That's not the mayor's fault, you know. About 10 of those babies were born with AIDS. About 12 of them were crack babies. And about half of them were babies born to mothers who checked in the hospital on the false name and address and checked out and left those babies. They call them border babies. One cannot accuse the mayor of making the border babies. And so one might challenge the mayor, as any public official ought to be challenged, but to put on his doorstep the flow of semi-automatic weapons in D.C. and the flow of crack and coke and heroin in D.C., in my judgment, is not fair.
You brought up the issue of crack, and that's on far too many doorsteps, not only in the nation's capital, but around the country. Very shortly, President Bush will be getting on national television to describe his new anti-drug policy. A lot of media are reporting that it sounds like more of the same. We're going to come down harder on casual users. We're going to put more money into law enforcement. And this is the umpteenth war on drugs that's been declared during the course of the last 3 administrations.
It could even be less of the same because they've cut interdiction, because the Defense Department does not want to play a role in the drug war. And the fact is, unless we're willing to fight drug laws as we have fought communist threats, if you will, then we're not very serious about using the word war. Or if we're not willing to defend our borders, right now we have 6 what they call cutters off of the coast of Florida in Key West to stop drugs flowing through the passage where 85% of the drugs come through. 5 of those boats are used to chase Haitians back to Haiti, who get within 30 miles of the border. Only 1 is used to interdict drugs. So we've cut back on drug interdiction. There's a lot of focus on prisons, more prisons, but not much focus on rehabilitation. You can't lock up all of these children. You must, in fact, have a great investment in education in their formative years. But for those who are sick, who want to get well, it's 8 and 9 months waiting list for rehabilitation. We ought to have swift punishment of the guilty, but there must be an understanding of education in the formative years, cutting the taste for drugs, as well as the idea of rehabilitation for the sick. And I would think, lastly, they had this big press conference in last April, Bennett and Thornburg and Kemp, for the D.C. plan. Tonight, they don't even have the D.C. plan. He does not even have a plan to deal with the flow of drugs in D.C., nor has he convened D.C. leadership to be a part of thinking through a plan to fight drugs in the city.
I know we have a caller waiting, but I do want to pursue this issue to its logical conclusion, and we are going to get to you, caller. It just seems to me that I have rarely ever heard any elected official, Republican or Democratic, offer a drug plan that is comparable, if you will, to the plan offered by the American Heart Association for ending the use of tobacco products. And that is a plan that has specific goals and objectives. We all hear about drug plans that are going to eliminate the scourge of drugs completely. At least the American Heart Association has the good sense to say, we hope 20,000 people will stop smoking this year after this program. Why don't our drug plans ever do that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, and when you look at the drug issue, you know, with all the talk about coke, crack, and heroin, as Dr. Thurman Evans would say, we're losing 366,000 people a year to cigarettes, about 1,000 a day. Giamatti died not because of coke or crack, but the cigarettes finally blew him up and blew him away, the head of baseball. The impact of the growth of liquor and tying it into sex and on oversaturating inner city communities with it is a killer. And then there is the drug crisis at coke, crack, and heroin. Cut the supply of it. We, the people, must cut the demand for it. Swift punishment for the guilty, but the rehabilitation for the sick. There are 375,000 pregnant women on drugs. This plan does not have a place for those 375,000 pregnant women who are addicted to drugs.
Thank you for waiting, caller. It is your turn. You're now on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Do I have 1 or 2 questions? Hello?
Yes, you're there. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here, but I'm asking, do I have an option for 2 questions or just
Go
one?
with 1. We'll see how much time we have.
Okay. Reverend Jackson, I'd like to ask the question. I mean, I like the way he posed in his last speech way back when he said, how long, not long. I mean, I know he's going to be the president of the U.S. and like lots of skeptics I think the next time around he's going to be. But I'd like to work for his organization. I'm wondering, can I get in touch with him or write or find out? Because like lots of people, I think we need great role models like him, and I'd like to one day be able to give good speeches just like he does.
To ask your second question, please make it quickly, but write down the phone number for the Rainbow Coalition, which you will see aired at the end of the show. What's your next question?
Sure. Next question is, it seems as if behind all politicians, a great rhetoric. And like you, Kojo, I'm from the region in the Caribbean. I've seen lots of great black leaders. So in the United States, I think we yet to see a great leader as Reverend Jackson, for example. But I think one of the things that really disturbed me is in the last campaign where people said he's a great leader, he's a great spokesman, but yet he's not an electable politician. I'm wondering if he can ferret out for me exactly what did they mean by that and whether or not he thinks he's electable.
Thank you.
Well, we know that was a code word. Whoever gets the most votes is electable. And we got more votes than the second place finisher ever got. I'm not discouraged by it because I watched a new consciousness develop in our people. You know, our people now expect that one day a Bill Gray will head the Democratic Party on the Hill. It's a reasonable expectation. Ron Brown is now chairman of the party. It's now a reasonable expectation. Many people thought that Colin Powell should have been on Bush's ticket as opposed to Dan Quayle because now people are thinking president. And so if we did nothing more than to expand people's self-concept, that was a contribution to the ongoing process. I say I may or may not get to the White House. And I have not given up on that possible dream, but our children will. In a real sense, that's the whole point.
Two quick questions. How about those people who say it is not the issue of race that causes you not to be elected, but the issue of personality?
I'm not convinced that's at all true. All of us have different personalities. They often say it's ideology. It's interesting about the ideology.
You're too leftist, huh?
That's it's another way of calling you a funny name. I argued that we should impose sanctions against South Africa. That was considered way out. But then that November, Congressman Dellums put forth the proposition, and the Congress passed it. It's now the law of the land. It's no longer so left. I argued in the Middle East, we should talk with all people and seek to pull PLO and Israel into a relationship to have peace to replace chaos and war. Well, that is now government policy. We should talk with the Soviet leader at least once a year and reduce some of these tensions about a nuclear war that must not be fought. Well, that happens now. We should cut contra aid. That's now government policy. And so more and more, I remember raising the issue of drugs. They said, Jesse, the real stuff is budget. I mean, drugs, that's for children. Now drugs is the #1 issue. Who raised the drug issue to its highest level and forced it on the table? That came out of our campaign. And so the issue about being to this, to that, the fact is we're breaking down these barriers and we're going to win.
We got to go to a break, but I read where you had said on one occasion that it is unfortunate, but the masses of our young people will never get to know who Colin Powell is. Could you explain that to me?
Well, because they will not have an access to him and his career, but in time they will. I mean, he's a brilliant man, very able, very stable, on a good growth curve, very credible. He's now chief of staff. I mean, Colin Powell is clearly presidential material.
Okay, let's take a break. We're going to come right back and continue our conversation with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So stay with us. Not anymore. Reverend Jesse Jackson. Let's talk about Virginia Beach. It's been in the news for the last 3 days, and the pictures that I saw on television were frankly frightening. They reminded me so much of the pictures I saw. Not only that, but the 1968 Democratic Convention.
It was obviously an overreaction. Those people who looted stores and who were stealing and degrading the others who were there having fun were wrong and should have been dealt with. But the stereotype, everybody there who was African American and just started swinging sticks was excessive. And though the mayor tried to deny it, based upon the police film, what we saw on network film was young men, for the most part, running down the streets, being beaten with sticks. And of course, the NAA and Urban League leadership that protested that, they were right, and they deserve support. But whether it's the beating in Virginia Beach, or the way that people's reputations can be discredited here in Washington, and as in the Stallings case, or the lynching in Brooklyn, or the killing in Howard Beach, we must demand equal protection under the law. We must demand security and an end to this violence against people based upon race or based upon sex.
But we are clearly witnessing an exacerbation of racial tensions in America. To what would you attribute that?
In part, the climate set by Ronald Reagan. The bully pulpit, the White House, is your source of direction and leadership. I remember when, after Lyndon Johnson had been a segregationist so long as a matter of law, and Texas and all of that, when the Civil Rights Bill was passed, in effect, he said, well, boys, it's all over now. It's a new day, and those who violate civil rights laws, use of public accommodation, you'll go to jail. It's a new day. When the leadership spoke, people, well, you know, it was good while it lasted, but it's over now. The president spoke. Reagan opened up his 1980 campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi. There's no railroad that goes through there, you know, no airport. The only thing it's really known for is the place where Stroner, Goodman, and Cheney, two Jews and an African-American, were killed. And his speech there sent a message so clear until the Klan, in their paraphernalia, endorsed him that day. And that was kind of ignored as if it were not real. It was very real. From Philadelphia, Mississippi, to laying a wreath at Bitburg, to his being apologist for Johannesburg, to accusing Dr. King of being a communist 18 years after he was dead. Just a straight line of racial insensitivity and bigotry coming from the highest office that has had a profound impact upon how American people see each other. So we need moral leadership in high places.
Why hasn't George Bush's call for a kinder, gentler America begun to reverse that pattern in any way? Because
it's rhetoric without teeth. If he wants it to be kinder and gentler, then why will he not put forth a civil rights commission that's bipartisan and credible and can give us good reports on government practices in race and sex? So that's not substance to follow up the symbolism. While he fights for flag rights as a great symbol, not fight for equal rights for women or for workers' rights or for children's rights, more symbolism. Why would he recommend Lucas to be the head civil rights lawyer who's never tried a case? It's like underestimating our intelligence, as it were. He had a civil rights meeting at the White House a month ago, the 25th anniversary. But he did not dialogue with us. He convened the meeting, had a press conference. At 25 years, we've made great progress. It was over. He sent the leaders out of the East Wing, the press out of the West Wing. There was no talking with him or with the press. So Reagan has built the tracks to take us back, and Bush has greased those tracks. And we must declare and halt to the violation of the rights of people based upon race or sex or religion.
You do have to go back to the telephones, and thank you for waiting, caller, but you mentioned flag rights. Do you feel that whenever you see a Ku Klux Klan demonstration and they're waving the American flag, do you think that that denigrates the flag as much as someone burning it?
Well, of course, it denigrates the flag, but it's their right to hoist it. But you know, the fact is people were burning crosses long before they were burning flags, and there's no indication that he wants a cross burning rights amendment, nor has Klansmen burning the cross weakened the character of the Christian faith with its African roots and its ethical depth. And so it's another case of hyping people's emotions. And when you get through with the flag issue, you still have the homeless abounding. You still have drugs flowing. You still have easy access to guns. You still have pregnant mothers without prenatal care. And so the issues of great depth are still left undealt with.
Indeed. Thank you very much for waiting, caller. You are on the air now. Go ahead with your question or comment, please. Caller?
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Good evening, Reverend Jackson and Kojo.
Hi.
I have two things. One, Reverend Jackson, I understand that God made the earth and everything around it. When it comes to marijuana, it is a seed that God made, and man cannot stop it from growing. You put it in the ground, and it grows. Why does man outlaw that, but make alcohol and tobacco legal?
Well, I suppose the effective use of herbs represent medicine, but it is the ineffective use, or should I say their use to the point of destruction. I mean, the same water that you drink that quench thirst will also drown you. So there is something to be said about how one uses the herbs from the earth. I mean, at the turn of the century, cocaine was used in Coca-Cola. Cocaine was used as a form of medicine. But now we're looking at an extremity that is now having the impact of killing and not of healing.
Okay, let's take another telephone call. It is your turn. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
My question to the Reverend Jesse Jackson is, hello?
Yes, you're right there. Go ahead.
Yes, my question to the Reverend Jesse Jackson is that since there's a lot of talk in the United States about the cost of building prisons for putting drug pushers and whatever away, and the cost is escalating, my question is, why can't we negotiate with other African nations to try to send some of these young people there? It seems like the cost would be a lot less than building prisons, and on top of that, it would also help to stem a type of a relationship between ourselves and the African countries, which is much needed since it's all been broken off since the past 200 or so years.
You really should not underestimate the intelligence, as it were, and needs of African people. African nations do not want American rejects, even if they're African Americans. They are not looking for American prisoners and drug dealers. They're looking for investment bankers. They're looking for land developers. They're looking for doctors and nurses and those who can explore minds. The fact is there really is no place in the world where there is a market seeking drug pushers and drug dealers, because they will destroy any society. And so I say, let's educate our children and not create these dealers and thugs. On the other hand, let's get those who are sick, who want to get well, get them well. But you would find a difficult time finding. I cannot imagine Zimbabwe or Zambia or Nigeria or any country opening up its doors for people who are clearly convicted of and inclined to deal or sell drugs.
During your campaign, you used to ask people in the audience, how many people own a Japanese video cassette recorder? And then you asked them how many owned a tank or any of the major things that the military produced, and nobody's hands were raised, and you would explain that's why the Japanese economy is moving ahead and ours isn't. We are in a situation right now where both Japan and West Germany are ahead of us, and a lot of viewers don't realize that at this point. And where the Soviet Union is all of a sudden saying, we don't feel like fighting anymore. We just want to put all these toys away and put our money someplace else. And we seem to be reacting to that in panic. We seem to be saying, no, even if they're doing that, we can't trust them. We have to keep our military machine going, despite the fact that it seems to be pushing our economy backwards.
And it's irrational. We're spending $150 billion a year defending Europe and Japan 45 years after the war. Europe and Japan are now creditor nations, and we are now a debtor nation. The Soviet Union has in effect said to Western Europe, since we're not going to fight, let's trade. We want to be partners. They've said the same thing to China. Now, after all, the Soviet Union shares 5,000 miles of border with China. And they're beginning to see the Chinese as 1 billion customers and neighbors, not 1 billion enemies. That's having a profound impact upon the economics of this world. Europe will now have a kind of common market of sorts, a unified market, they call it, by 1992.
Unified currency.
And they're going to be dealing with the Soviets as their next door neighbor, not just as their enemy, just as their threat. And so perestroika, or restructuring of the economy, is going to affect the Soviets. It's going to affect us as well. And we need to have a bold leadership that can match them not just monitor them. It's now time for third world development. It makes more sense to be expanding trade to third world countries where 7/8 of the world lives than draining them with debt and leaving them in threatening poverty.
Okay, let's take another telephone call. It is your turn. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good day, Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Good evening.
There seems to be a fierce competition in our public schools over jewelry and fashion. I'd like to know what's your opinion concerning implementing a uniform dress code. Do you see this quieting the competition any, thus creating an environment where kids can concentrate more on their schoolwork as opposed to expensive blue jeans and tennis shoes?
I support it very much.
Obviously, our mics were on before the show came on, because that's what we were just talking about.
I went to
before
Columbia Park Elementary School this morning, and I saw a fantastic thing. One, I saw parents creating traffic jams, bringing their children to school, and that was a beautiful sight. Here's a school, by the way, Columbia Park, just beyond Southeast Washington, where 2/3 of the parents are on public assistance. Where about 15 people were killed because of drugs within the last year. You know, all of these down stats, and yet they're in the top 10 percentile of the nation of the development of those children. And that school must be exalted because it's an oasis in the desert. Something good is happening. But the parents have made the decision to start the experiment of preparing a uniform dress code for their children. And they were there this morning, little kids, 6, 7, 8 years old, with little maroon sweaters and gray pants on. And that should be sufficient. And the young ladies had on their little uniforms. The mothers could make them. And so it just makes sense to have a basic uniform dress code and focus, therefore, on character and academics and not on clothes and on jewelry. And the paradox is you go to the wealthy private schools, they have uniform dress code. A navy blazer, gray pants, shirt and tie for dinner each night. And they dress in the daytime, they wear the uniforms and athletic clothes. So in real sense, the very wealthy have a uniform dress code for school youth, and it's cheaper and it just makes good sense.
I don't know if any of your children ever told you this, but when we discussed that issue on this show with some young people, one of the young gentlemen said, I don't like that because I need to express my creativity and I express it in the way that I dress. How would you have responded to that?
Well, that he should express his creativity and his capacity to retain and read and write and think. And he has put his value in the wrong thing, in what he wears, as opposed to who he is and whose he is and what his mission is in life.
Let's take another telephone call. It is your turn. You're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello, caller? Caller, are you there? When you went to Soviet Armenia, you unveiled a plan for the assistance in rebuilding churches in Soviet Armenia with the use of hopefully prefabricated materials in the United States. That plan, I think, was met with some enthusiasm, but has any progress been made?
Been difficult. You know, since we left and we had plans for several telethon dates that we put together, there's been this rise of nationalism within the Soviet Union. And much of it has centered in Armenia. Mm-hmm. And my sense is that our inability to get, as it were, the deal tied down has a lot to do with the Soviets not wanting to expose Armenia in a certain way, because what you may see is not only abandoned areas because of earthquake, but you'll also see rebellion within the Soviet Union. So I think that the political winds that have shifted there has had an impact upon slowing down our objective. My sense is that when we as a people reach beyond ourselves, it makes people beyond us reach to us as well. And we are part of the world. And as we reach out to Armenia, we gain allies to help us fight South Africa as well. I'm just convinced that we must not limit ourselves or ghettoize ourselves. When the youth in China were rebelling, they were not singing Happy Days Are Here Again. They were singing We Shall Overcome, because our movement has had an impact upon people all around the whole world.
Let's take another telephone call. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good evening to you both. I'd like to ask 3 questions, if I may.
Make them quick.
Very quick. Jesse, do you want to run for mayor, and are you going to run for mayor? And the third question is, with all the jurisdictions around Washington allowing handguns, would you allow D.C. citizens to have handguns? Thank you.
First of all, I have no plans to run for mayor, and two, there is no mayor's election. And the more people ask that question, which now the media has firmly implanted in people's minds, the less attention is left to put on issues as basic as 100,000 people in D.C. eligible to register are not registered, and that's real. The less time we have to spend on the impact of 50,000 parents taking their children to school, reuniting or creating that relationship, the less time we have to spend on, is the issue really who will be the mayor under the assumption of occupation, or who will be the 2 U.S. senators and the governor and the lieutenant governor and the federal judges under the assumption of emancipation. If D.C. has more people and pays more taxes than Delaware, than Vermont, than Wyoming, than Alaska, then why can't the people here have representation and people who can bargain on Capitol Hill? We must not settle for occupation.
Our caller wants to know why the people here can't have handguns. Our caller also wanted to know why people here cannot have handguns.
Well, I would discourage people having handguns. They have no socially useful purpose. We're not hunting animals with them, we're hunting people with them, and we need to stop the killing and beat our swords in the plowshares. We need to stop the flow of guns and stop the flow of drugs and increase civilization, because guns make us less secure, not more secure.
We're running out of time, but I want to ask you a little bit so our viewers can get an idea of Jesse Jackson, the man. You are the only national leader whom I can think of who is perceived as being bigger in stature than the organizations with which you are affiliated. Nobody ever thinks of Ben Hooks as being bigger than the NAACP or John Jacob as being bigger than the Urban League. Why does that perception continue, that you are bigger than the organizations that you're affiliated with?
Well, I've never just served the organization for which I work. In other words, I do not respond to coal miners in St. Paul, Virginia, just because it's a chapter of my organization there. I do not help farmers in Iowa or try to regain the land for African-American farmers in Alabama just because we have an organization there, because we own some land there. And so my will to serve has never been limited just to an organization. I believe in the organizational development, but our service really and commitment should be unlimited. That's why I feel so free to work with Ben Hooks or Joe Lowry or Dorothy Height, because at that level, frankly, I'm a free spirit.
What is the source of your advice? Who tells you, Jesse, you've made a political mistake here? Jesse, that was not the road to go. And at which point you'll say, you're right.
Starts with my wife. We have a very able and critical staff of people, whether it's Joe Johnson, who's now the executive director of the Rainbow Coalition, people like Roger Wilkins, Dr. Mary Berry, Roger Wilkins, Percy Sutton, Maxine Waters, Mario Ablato there. There are a number of people around this country for whom I have great respect, who have wrestled with the great issues of the day. And by being in the environment where these people function, you learn and you grow from them, and you grow through trial and error. What I'm in San Francisco, by God, is not finished with me yet, is that we must be willing to grow, to take the hard knocks and to learn from our experiences. I mean, every knock really is a boost. And so the biggest challenge in leadership is to keep your spirit up and not let your attitude bring you down.
This program is dedicated to the memory of late Congressman Mickey Leland, who died in the service of humanity. Before we go, what are your thoughts on Mickey Leland?
Well, you know, it was Mickey, but about 15 others who died with him as well on the mission. Mickey and Patrice Johnson, members of that staff. First of all, they died doing the right thing. It was to feed the hungry and to renew this kinship between African Americans. And that was noble and it was good, and we shall cherish Mickey's memory and his legacy by avowing our commitment to keep uniting African American and to feed the hungry.
Now
I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am Somebody.
Open up on these stairs. That's what this picture is. A picture on our album cover when we first opened up back in 73, I believe, or 74. I was 18 at the time. I'm 71 now. Soon is when we had the Push Expo on 43rd and Halsted. When he told his choir members, which I was a part of, that we are stars too, and we get to go behind the stage with all the celebrities. He made us feel important too. And then the marches we did. We went to where King got assassinated and stayed there overnight.
Okay. And then so
Proud. I must be respected. I must be protected.
Keep our history alive. It's important that we educate our children about Black history. They want to take it out of our schools.